So Jan, as you know, is Chief Science Officer at ENGIE. I'm a techno optimist, and it's always a great delight and pleasure to hear what's coming, what's going to save us all despite everything. And so really excited to hear, Jan, what's buried in the labs at ENGIE, what's going to be addressing the major challenge of climate change over the next few years, thanks to your efforts and those of your team. So Jan, the floor is yours. A big thanks again, and over to you.
Thanks a lot, Giffin, for this introduction. Thanks a lot also for for having me here. I'm happy and at the same time a little bit stressed to present to alumni of MBA, of course, because I'm quite a technical nerd. So I will do as much as I can to answer all your, I'm sure, great business insights. So I'm very much looking forward to this. Thank you for having me. So my name is Jan Mertens. I'm Chief Science Officer at ENGIE, and I'm also part-time professor at the University of Ghent in Belgium in the domain also of sustainable energy. So the idea of today is I will talk for about half an hour, maybe 35 minutes. That should leave us enough time for a great discussion, which I think is as interesting as the talk itself. There's two objectives today of this talk. I think it's really to convince you that how emerging technologies, technologies that are today not mature yet, how crucial they are, and how we will need them to help speed up this energy transition. If we really would take this 2-degree scenario seriously, I think emerging sustainable technologies are crucial, and which is why we publish every year this document, which is called Emerging Sustainable Technologies document. We used to publish it only for the ENGIE management, warning them or saying, look, these are technologies, not necessarily always that ENGIE is working on them ourselves, but which could impact us or our business in the future, and which we should keep an eye on, or many try to set up collaborations with the external world to try and understand these and see what they could mean to our business. So this is the idea of this document that we publish every year. At the same time, it's also reaching out the hand to our clients and colleagues to collaborate on these technologies. I mean, there is no this idea of I mean, the challenge is really way too large to tackle it alone as a company, but also as an industry, as a country, as a sector. I think everybody's starting to agree that this is something that we should collaborate on and stop doing things only on our own. Collaboration is really needed if we're serious about reaching this 2-degree scenario. So I will talk a little bit, if my slides want to move. Voilà. So what does this 2-degree scenario mean? I will not bore you with this because I think everybody knows what is meant with this 2-degree scenario. So warming up no more than 2 degrees. A little bit about ENGIE and ENGIE research, since I think most of you will know ENGIE research is probably a bit less known. So I'll talk a little bit about ENGIE research and what we do there. And then before going into the Emerging Sustainable Technologies document of 2021, I thought of giving you this little bit more higher level of these 3 pathways, which we think are crucial to reach carbon neutrality, and the order is important as well. So I will dig a little bit into that as well, and then to end up with conclusions and a discussion. So what does a 2-degree scenario mean? Just one slide on what it means for us as an electricity, as an energy company. Here you see, this is what in December 2015, the COP21 in Paris was agreed. So it was agreed that we would try to limit the global mean temperature rise well below 2 degrees. So this actually means, if you look on the graph on the right here, that we need to get rid of this 36 gigaton of CO2 that we're emitting today. By 2080, it has to be 0. Afterwards, it has to be negative. What it means for the power sector, which is this orange curve here, is today we're emitting about 13 ton of gigaton of CO2. Actually, for us, if we really want this is the IPCC report from 2017, if I remember well. But anyway, it doesn't differ that much in the new one. It means for the power sector, for us, the electricity sector, for example, we have to be carbon neutral by 2050 already and be carbon negative afterwards. So the challenge is enormous for all of us. And I think from the power sector in particular, a lot of effort is expected from us very, very soon. I mean, the good news is for power, for electricity, we do have alternatives today. Wind and solar are today cheaper than gas and coal, even before the war. I mean, the fossil is today becoming more expensive than the renewables. So this is why, of course, the IPCC and the IEA is expecting a lot of effort from the power, and a lot faster than for some of the other industries. And then you could say, okay, but who cares if it's 1.5 degree or 2 degrees or 3 degrees? Well, this United Nations publication is quite interesting, where they try to summarize what is the difference if you limit it to 1.5, 2 or 3 degrees. And so what you see is, if you try to limit it to 1.5 degrees, so the frequency of disasters, if we have an increase about 1.5 degrees, there's 3% probability of an ice-free Arctic summer in 1 year. So it means that in 1 year, well, it's 3 out of 100 years, we would have no ice on the Arctic. So the 3%. Now, if you go to, and the same thing is an average length of drought for 1.5 degrees is 2 months. Now, if you go to 2 degrees, which is only like half a degree higher, well, you already increase your probability of a ice-free Arctic from 3 to 16%, and the average length of drought from 2 to 4 months. Now, going to 3 degrees is just simply not realistic, because it would mean that about 60% of the years, so more than 6 out of 10 years, we will have no ice on the Arctic, and the average length, if there is a drought, would be about 10 months. So this is not saying, it's okay, we'll leave it to 2 or 2.5 or 3. No, I mean, this 1.5, 2 degrees is really the absolute limit. There's no way we can negotiate on this. Okay, enough about the 2 degree scenario and the context. I think everybody is quite well aware of that, but I just wanted to highlight that from the power, there is a lot of effort expected, and this 1.5 degree is not just a random number that was chosen. ENGIE and ENGIE Research, I think you know ENGIE is a large energy company, mainly electricity and gas, a lot of renewables, a lot of storage activities, hydrogen activities. So I will not go into those details there. What I did want to share is that ENGIE has announced to be carbon neutral by 2045, which is as such not different from many of our colleagues. What is probably different from many of our colleagues is that ENGIE has announced that we want to be carbon neutral by 2045 on all 3 scopes. Let me try to explain this idea of scopes, although I'm pretty sure that many of you are familiar with this. But there's a scope 1, which is your direct emissions. So these are emissions from our ENGIE activities, from our electricity production, from our energy production or exploration. Then there's the scope 2, which is for many companies purchased electricity for their own use, which is quite limited for ENGIE, as you could imagine. But this scope 3 one, this is the interesting one, because here you have all the emissions which are indirectly related to you. So here it's all the emissions related also to our products that we buy and sell. So if you have a look at the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions of ENGIE today, we emit about a little bit less than 200 million tons of CO2, which is of course enormous. But if you have a look at the scope 1, 2, and 3 division, well, maybe a little bit surprising, but actually the scope 1, which are emissions from ENGIE assets, it's only about, it's about 28% of our full CO2 emissions. Scope 2 is almost nothing, as I said, and then scope 3 is really 70% of our emissions are scope 3. This is of course related to the energy and the gas that we sell to our customers, and the emissions related to, for example, the gas that we sell to our customers. So ENGIE's ambition to be carbon neutral on all 3 scopes actually implies that in 2045, all electricity and all gas, all energy, in fact, that we will sell to our customers or that we will buy will actually also have to be carbon neutral. And this is, of course, challenging. So this is what I wanted to say on the ENGIE's ambition. And ENGIE Research, so at ENGIE we've got about 900 researchers in different labs. I will show a slide on that, but we're not a General Electric or a Siemens or companies that develop technologies from scratch. what we try to do, or what we like to do, is partner up with technology developers, with other industries, with startups, and try to bring technologies to the market as soon as possible and understand them a little bit better and earlier than our competitors, so that we can hand them over from ENGIE research to our business units and saying, look, we think that this technology is now ready to integrate into your bids, in the hope that we can give them a competitive advantage in their bids, and of course win projects. Just to give you an idea of a few technologies that we are looking at today. So we like piloting things, we like testing things together with academics, industrial, government partners. So we test things and then hand them over to our business. A nice one, for example, is this bifacial solar testing, which are PV panels which can harvest light from both sides, so produce electricity from light harvest at both sides. We've been testing these things for about 10 years in our lab, our solar lab in Chile in this case. We know how they work, we know how they behave, what kind of angle is the best under which circumstances, should we track the sun or not, should we put something on the ground, on the soil, to make it reflect on the back panel. All these kinds of technical things we try out during a few years, let's say, and now this has become standard. This is integrated in ENGIE's bids for large-scale solar PV plants. So this is really this is a nice example, but we try to do it with other things that we've got, testing large batteries, different suppliers, different integrators, how they behave with respect to the grid regulation is another one. Floating wind turbine is an interesting, which we're testing in Portugal. So huge wind turbines, but floating, so no longer fixed offshore, but having them float, which means have a lot of advantage because you can install them in deeper seas, but also for installation and maintenance, it is easier because you can tow them out there and tow them back if needed. I will not go into all the details of this, but these are some of the projects that we are working on. I said we're not technology developers, which is true for many of the technologies. There are exceptions, and these are related to green gas. So for example, we got a project on 2G biomass gasification. So this is about turning biomass, well, in this case, bio-waste, dry bio-waste, into biogas. This is something where we are technology developers, where we are interested in patents and IP. And another one is the production of hydrogen through solar panels. So solar panels which produce hydrogen immediately without going through an electricity step and an electrolyzer in this case. So this gives you a flavor of the kind of things that we're working on, which are quite varied. Okay, 3 pathways towards this carbon neutrality. And I said the order was important. And the first one is an obvious one, but it remains important. It's something we've been doing for decades, of course. It's trying to increase the energy efficiency, do the same or even more with less energy, and also think a lot more circular, where waste becomes a feedstock. Just one slide on this first pathway. And it is the first one because it's the easiest one, it's the lowest hanging fruit, is the one that we should consider the first if we think about reducing our emissions and reaching carbon neutrality. And there, of course, as you could imagine, ENGIE having a Gaz de France background, we do like biogas. And biogas, for me, at least if it's done on waste, is really a very nice example of circular thinking, where you collect your bio waste, you do an anaerobic digestion, which is pretty simple, and basically you feed it to bacteria, which will turn it into biogas for you, which you can either directly use or clean it up, purify it, inject into the grid, and use it in industrial processes. So this is the first one. The second pathway, which is crucial, and which of course everybody is talking about, is that we should electrify. And I think we agree, we should really electrify as much as possible and far beyond our electrical cars. Electrifying electrical cars is only the first thing, I think, and I will show you later. We should try to really electrify as much as possible. Also in the industry, whatever is electrifiable, I think we should electrify. And this is good news is coming here. I mean, this is from an Amber report recently between 2000 and 2021, which showed what happened with the share of renewable electricity. So this is wind and solar. It's not even renewable. So it's only wind and solar. And you will see that in 2021, if I start the animation, wind and solar hit a record 10% of global electricity. And it's pretty interesting. You see, you got the first movers, as it says, Denmark and Germany already back in the early 2000s have exceeded the 10% pretty fast. But then you can see at around 2010, 12, things really start picking up. You can see the world average increasing significantly. A lot of European countries exceeding the 10% already by 2015. And you can see that in the world by 2021, the share of renewables, of wind and solar, has exceeded the 10% last year. So this is rather good news. This is going fast, and it will need to continue to go fast. If you add, for example, so it's 10% wind and solar. If you add hydropower, well, all clean electricity reaches today about 38%, which is higher for the first time in 2021 than coal, which unfortunately still remains at 36%. Actually, the IEA, but not only the IEA, also Greenpeace and others do yearly predictions of what will happen, for example, in this case, with the additional annual photovoltaic addition, so the annual solar electricity. So you see that every year, so the black line is actually what was actually installed over time. And you could see that every report, so this is their World Energy Outlook, which is published either every 2 years or every year, where the IEA predicts the new solar production in the future. So you could see here, this was a prediction in 2006, what would happen. What actually happened was the black line. So you can see that every year when they published their World Energy Outlook, they were actually far underestimating what actually happened. And this, of course, is great news. And I'm convinced that this will continue. And solar is the new king, as Fatih Birol from the IEA recently said. There is a lot of expectations from solar, and the good news is that this is going a lot faster than anybody ever predicted. And it's not impossible. If you really want to reach this 2-degree scenario, basically what we have to do is we have to keep this year-on-year growth of about 20%, which we have been doing almost in the past. So every year we need to install another 20% extra. This is what this graph is saying. And if we would continue to do that, this would actually allow us to reach this 1.5-degree pathway. So it's not that we are asking something or that we need to do something, at least with respect to solar, something extra terrestrial or something. It's something that we have been doing over the last decades, and we would need to continue to do it in the future if we want to reach this 1.5 or 2-degree scenario. And then, of course, apart from the production, a lot of work is also expected from demand side management. So it's really about how can we match the production of electricity, the intermittent production of renewable electricity. Wind and solar are not always predictable, but are certainly intermittent, which means that we have to do things like demand side management, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, vehicle to infrastructure, things like that. We will really need to make sure that we consume the electricity, or at least store it when it is cheap and abundant, and use it from storage, for example, in cars, because these are basically batteries on wheels, right? And use it when electricity is scarce and expensive. Instead of taking from the grid, we will probably need to look into solutions. And this is for home, but also in the industry. A lot is expected from things like energy management systems. Same thing, where you try to consume energy when it is cheap and abundant, and try to not use it or use it from storage when it's expensive and scarce. And this is why in our emerging technologies document that we published this year, well, about 6 of the technologies, 4 out of the 6 technologies. So we had 6 technologies. I will present them very fast later, which we reported on in our 2021 document. Actually, 4 of the technologies are related to electricity production, just because this electricity production is so crucial, and we will need a lot more of this renewable electricity if we want to meet our ambitions. So the first pathway is energy efficiency. The second one is try to electrify as much as possible. But I think we think, and we're not alone there. I think most of the industry, the scientific people, agrees that after having increased your energy efficiency and try to electrify whatever is possible, there will remain a need for molecules, is what we call them. And this is the third pathway, which I like to call this need for molecules. And this is, I'm presenting here to MBA, so you will probably understand this a lot better than I do. But I like this idea of this marginal abatement cost. So it's the cost basically of what it costs to stop emitting or to no longer emit a ton of CO2. And if you have a look there, you've got different pathways. So this is the direct electrification. This is e-fuels replacing liquids. So this is fuels made from electricity, or here's where you use e-fuels replacing natural gas. And basically what this shows is that in sectors where you have like your personal car, for example, but at least in the future also probably where you can also residential heating makes a lot of sense if you can do it with direct electrification, since the marginal abatement cost will be a lot cheaper doing it directly with electricity than going to liquids or natural gas. But for some of the sectors like iron, like cement, like chemicals, where you need high temperature heat, for example, electricity can either not do the job or is becoming way too expensive to do it. And in these cases, we will continue to need molecules because simply electricity cannot do it or it becomes too expensive. So this is like high temperature heat, but also heavy mobility, aviation. I don't think we will see any planes soon flying on electricity, at least large planes. It's just not energy dense enough. It's clear that we will need molecules continue to need molecules for aviation, but also for long distance transport of energy. We will need molecules. Batteries are no solution if you need to transport renewable energy over longer distances, also over long time periods. Between seasons, storing energy as electricity is just not possible in batteries. Batteries, they have a degradation over time. They're not suited for seasonal storage. So also for long-term energy storage, long-distance energy transport, we will continue to need molecules. And then, of course, the question is, how can we get access to these molecules also in a carbon neutral way? Of course, they should not be fossil molecules. They should be green molecules, carbon neutral molecules. And this is where I'll talk a little bit about more. For Belgium, for example, there are two, the Federal Plan Bureau published a study last year, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I think it's valid for many European countries, also for France and Germany. What they try to do is they try to calculate two scenarios, a diversified scenario and a deep electrification scenario. So in the deep electrification scenario, they said that, look, this is the amount of electricity that we will need in 2050 to be carbon neutral in Belgium. First thing, and don't worry about too much about the differences in the two scenarios. Let's stick to the deep electrification scenario, where you try to electrify whatever is possible, also in industry. Well, you see that first thing that you see is the electricity demand will triple. We will need 3 times more, and by that time, renewable electricity, of course, green electricity. We will need 3 times more electricity than we have today, and on top of it has to be 100% renewable. But even then, if you see that this is the amount of electricity that we will need, it's only the blue part, or the blue part of the electricity will be consumed as electricity. So this is the part that we will consume electricity as electrons. The green part, the electricity will actually be converted at power to X, so electricity to a molecule. You can see that even in the deep electrification scenario, about 1/3 of the electricity will not be consumed as electricity, but will be consumed as X, as a molecule. And of course, I think we're pretty realistic, at least in Belgium. We will never have enough green electricity to do this. So probably a large part of this green-ish electricity will have to be imported from countries, from the Middle East, from Chile, from Australia, where renewable electricity is cheap and abundant. We'll probably turn it into molecules over there and import the molecules as gas, as methanol, as ammonia, as all of these other molecules we will need to import into Belgium. So this is just as we are importing fossil fuels today. I mean, this is not a not that much different as what we're doing today. It is just that they have to be made in a sustainable way from electricity in countries where it is cheap and abundant. So this is a third way, this need for molecules. And then, of course, if you talk about molecules, the hype that everybody's talking about, and rightly so, I dare to say, is that, of course, the first obvious molecule is hydrogen. And I will dig a little bit into this as well, and try to explain you why I think hydrogen is crucial, but it will probably not always be the end molecule, and we will need other molecules on top of hydrogen to do the things that we need to do. And I'll explain you a little bit more about that. So hydrogen is a great solution. You can make a lot of different colors of hydrogen, and I will spare you the different colors. But there's a lot of ways that you can make hydrogen in a low carbon way. The most obvious one, and one that is highest on ENGIE strategy, is green hydrogen, where you take renewable electricity, do water splitting, and basically split water into hydrogen and oxygen, which give you this green hydrogen, which you can then use in the industry for mobility, for whatever you want to do. But you could also do it from natural gas, which is the way we're doing it today. Today, 99% of our hydrogen comes from natural gas, where you make it react with steam. So steam methane reforming, it turns it into hydrogen, which you can then use. The trouble is, though, if you have methane here, which you make react with water, basically with steam, it's you emit CO2. Today, this CO2 is just emitted. We could think, of course, of capturing it and storing it into depleted oil and gas fields, for example. And this way we would get also a low carbon hydrogen. In this case, we will no longer call it green hydrogen, but this is what people like calling blue hydrogen. You can even have pyrolysis, where you also take natural gas, but you heat it up to high temperatures and you turn it into solid carbon and a hydrogen. So it's another process to get low carbon hydrogen. I think people call this turquoise hydrogen, but there are many more. You can also use, in France, for example, you're thinking about using nuclear and do the water splitting, which should also give you access to low carbon hydrogen. In that case, we would call it pink hydrogen. So hydrogen can have many colors, but we like to focus on green hydrogen, which is on top of our strategy within ENGIE. So hydrogen is the first molecule, I dare to say, where electricity cannot do the job. But of course, in green hydrogen, for example, you lose about 40% of your electricity, is lost only about 60% of your electricity, energy in your electricity ends up in your hydrogen. So you need to have good reasons to go to hydrogen. And the good reason is, of course, if electricity cannot do the job, it makes sense to go to hydrogen. So hydrogen is a great molecule, but it does have one major challenge, and that is so difficult to store or to transport. So we published this, it's already 2 years ago in the meantime, with a little bit of a provocative title saying why the carbon neutral energy transition will imply the use of lots of carbon. And this is depicted in this figure here. So imagine you want to transport or store a certain amount of energy, in this case 10 kilowatt hour. You can do that in 1 liter of diesel or petrol or kerosene. 1 liter of diesel contains about 10 kilowatt hour of energy. Now, if you want to do it in battery electricity, you'd see you need about 27 times that volume to store the same amount, which is why I was saying flying planes, for example, which would contain fuel tanks in this case, which are that much larger, is not anything that we will see anytime soon. But even if you go to hydrogen, if we compress it to 350 bars, you would still need to move or transport 13 times the same volume around to transport the same amount of energy as you would have in your petrol or your diesel or your kerosene. And even if you compress it even further to 700 bars, still 7 times, you can make it liquid. We can make it liquid just as we do with gas, LNG. We could make a hydrogen liquid as well. Trouble is, we have to go down to minus 250 degrees, which is very close to the absolute minimum, as you know. And by doing it with the technologies that we have today, we lose, after having lost already 40% in our electrolysis, we will lose here again up to 35% of the energy in our hydrogen to actually make it liquid. And even then, we need to transport 4 times more volume around. So even large aeroplanes on hydrogen, you see, if we would need fuel tanks, which are a few times larger than today, aerodynamics are so crucial for large planes that it will be very, very hard to have large planes, transatlantic flights using hydrogen anytime soon, just because I always dare to say shocking. It's not true, of course, but that there is very little energy in hydrogen. Well, volumetrically speaking, it is true. This is why we think turning it into methane, for example, into gas, makes a lot of sense, because you have to transport far less around. So for liquid natural gas, you can do but minus 160 degrees, and we can do this pretty efficiently. We don't lose that much energy in doing it, and it allows us to move around only about 1.7 times the volume that we need to do if we move around or store diesel or petrol, for example. Which is why we think that hydrogen should be used as the first obvious molecule, but only if you can use it and store it close by. If you don't have to transport it, if you don't have to store it over longer time periods, it probably makes sense to use hydrogen. This is also depicted in this a little bit controversial clean hydrogen ladder, but I like the idea. I don't think I agree with all the classifications, but at least I like the idea of saying that, look, where should we use hydrogen, and where can we do it with electricity or batteries, or where should we do it with e-fuels? And here you see that it's a little bit an analogy of your freezer and your refrigerator. You see how efficient it is to use hydrogen for different applications. And there, of course, you can see that for 2- and 3-wheelers, but even for cars, it's probably not very efficient to use hydrogen for that. And if you can do it with electricity, it's a lot more efficient, makes a lot more sense. And your marginal abatement cost, as I said before, will be a lot lower. But if you go to this like shipping, heavy industry, chemistry, long-term storage, long-distance transport, there you see that it makes sense to use hydrogen, and in some cases, not only hydrogen, but turn it into e-fuels, because either you have no alternative, or it is just not feasible with electricity, or it becomes too expensive. So if we agree that we will still need these molecules, such as methane, for example, when there's the question of how can we make them in a sustainable way? And this is, of course, what I tried to depict here, and which is referred to in the literature as carbon capture and utilization. And so if we still need the molecules, what we're doing today is we're taking methane, natural gas, out of the ground, burning it in our infrastructure for electricity and gas. And this is, of course, the one that we should stop emitting, because this leads to global warming, of course. But if we agree that we still need this molecule for high temperature heat, for long distance storage, for long-term transport, for other processes which simply cannot be electrified, then we have to make it. We have to synthesize this methane, because we still need it, but we can no longer afford to take it out of the ground. And so this means that we need to synthesize it, and we can synthesize it by taking CO2, make it react with water. In many cases, you will first split your water into hydrogen and oxygen, take the hydrogen, make it react with your CO2, synthesize our methane, which we can then use on our infrastructure. And by doing this, we can become not decarbonized. We still need a lot of carbon, but we can become carbon neutral if this CO2 is biogenic, as we call it. It's either taken out of the air or from a biogas installation, for example. It allows us to become completely carbon neutral, which is, of course, what we're after by 2045, by 2050. The IPCC also said that part of this CO2, it will not be enough to be only neutral. Part of it, we will have to store it away and do carbon capture and storage. So this idea of producing these e-molecules, so molecules made from electricity, basically, is very high on our strategic agenda. This is a nice example in France, where we take, oh, sorry, I see it's in French, but we take electricity, we do the water splitting with renewable electricity into hydrogen. We take CO2. In this case, it comes from a biogas installation. And, you know, but biogas, it's about 60% methane, 40% CO2. So we take this CO2, we let it react, in this case, chemically over a catalyst, but this could also be done biologically. You have bacteria, if you feed them hydrogen and CO2, they will turn it into methane for you, which of course we can then use to do the things where electricity can not do the job. So this is why it's so high on our agenda to produce these e-fuels. And you can even take it further. I like this new published paper at the end of last year from colleagues at the University of Ghent, where these are actually chemists, they're working for the chemical industry. So where today we have this fossil chemistry, where we take these raw materials, we take oil, natural gas, coal, and we produce plastic, electronics, solvents, detergent in a fossil chemistry, and you can see the wordplay. Where what we should really do is we should try to electrify, use electricity and CO2 as a raw material. So the raw material in this case no longer fossil fuel, but it is CO2, it is water, it is biomass, and then produce the same chemicals that we will still need, but from raw materials such as these, no longer fossil ones, and of course a lot of electricity. So we should move from this fossil chemistry, if you want, to this e-chemistry. And to do that, we will need, and now I've come to this emerging technologies document, and let me just check the time. We should do that, of course. We will need a lot of emerging technologies, especially for this third pathway, for this green molecule production. A lot of the technologies today are not mature. And this is also depicted in this graph from the International Energy Agency, and where it shows here on the right, if we want to reach this net zero emissions by 2050, actually, the blue part is the mature. So the blue part are technologies that are mature. So here is where you will find your PV and your wind. So the IEA, what it's basically saying here is that if you want to reach net zero emissions by 2050, only about a quarter, even less than a quarter of technologies that we will need to reach it are mature today. So more than 75% of the technologies that we will need are today not mature. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It means that they're actually in early adoption, that they're in demonstration, that they're in prototypes, that they're somewhere in a lab, in a research lab, but at least they're not mature today. So it's really urgent that we scale up all these technologies to reach our net zero ambitions by 2045. If you have a look at the heavy industry and long distance transport, there it's even worse. These are sectors which I call hard to make carbon neutral. I don't like to decarbonize because I think we will need carbon to make them carbon neutral, but which are very hard to make carbon neutral. Heavy industry and long distance transport, there you see, well, only a very small part of the technologies are mature today to help us do this. And this is where you will find your hydrogen, your e-fuels, and all these other new novel technologies that we will need to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And so this is why we published this this document this year, the Emerging Sustainable Technologies. Just one slide on, because I get the question every time now, how do you select these technologies? And this is a difficult question. Don't read the slide, I will skip it. But what we try to do it quantitatively in the past. You know, look at patents, look at publications, look at the news, try to have a quantitative way of ranking emerging technologies and then saying, look, this is an objective quantitative ranking of the technologies that we identified in 2021. Well, actually, if you do that, our experience shows that you end up with nearly only digital technologies. There are so many people working and publishing on digital technologies that all the more, I don't know, hardcore energy technologies, let's say, you will just not detect them because they will be overwhelmed by this enormous amount of digital technologies that are out there today. So this is why we moved away from this quantitative and we do it qualitatively, where we interview our experts. We've got 900 researchers in ENGIE, and they've got, of course, an academic background in combination with their industrial insights, because these are people that do walk outside on the industrial side, that do see things, that do have the sense of realism, I think. And so combining this, I think, is pretty unique. And this is why the pathway that we chose to identify technologies rather than to try and do it quantitatively, because it just did not work. Very interesting, this year, for the first time, we also did a look back on what about the technologies that we reported on in previous editions. Actually, what happened to them? How wrong were we basically in our predictions? Have these technologies really broken through as we expected it? Are they slowly progressing, or have they really almost disappeared? So these are the 6 technologies that we presented this year. I will only present one because time is ticking away. I will only present you metal fuels in 2 slides. We also reported on natural hydrogen, which is hydrogen that is seeking out of the ground. What you can see in different parts of the world, and actually more and more as we're investigating it, in some parts of the world, we get what we have these fairy circles, which are circles of around 30 to 50 meter diameter, where nothing lives anymore. So the ground is completely white. Everything is reduced, as we call it, chemically. And this is just simply because hydrogen is actually seeping out of the ground. So the question is there a way that we can actually harvest, explore, and produce this hydrogen and use it for our energy? So this is a new upcoming topic which we are investigating. The second one is PV everywhere. It's the idea of having XIPV, so integrated PV, and this can be building integrated PV, so having PV in your building, but it can also be vehicle integrated PV. You will see that next generation of cars will have PV integrated in their carrosserie, as we call it, but also infrastructure integrated, agriculture integrated. I had to combine PV with agriculture, floating PV. So this idea of PV everywhere is really something that is out there. And if you want to read more, you can download the document, or I think we can even share it afterwards. This road to 30% efficiency PV cells is another one where people are looking at combining different technologies, not only the silicon, but combining the silicon with, for example, perovskites to reach very high efficiency PV cells. Wind blade circularity remains a bit of an issue because we're not very sure yet what we can do with all these wind blades that will soon become, well, we need to do something with it when we are decommissioning the oldest wind turbines. Metal fuse, I will explain. Fusion power, so this is about nuclear fusion. Of course, this is not new in 2021, but for the first time in 2021, what we noted and why we reported it on it is that for the first time, actually, it was not only public money going into the research, but people like ENI, like Exelon, the Bill Gates Foundation, for the first time invested private money in nuclear fusion, which is why we thought, oh, maybe there is something moving there and it may be worth reporting, taking it into our 2021 edition. Okay, so metal fuse, very shortly, what is it? Basically, it's another solution to do, and I've repeated this a few times, I just realized, to do long-term storage of energy or long-distance transport of energy using metals. So basically what we have is a metal fuse. If you make it very, very fine, iron or aluminium, actually it's pretty explosive. If you make it react with oxygen, basically burning it, which is what we do with coal. Coal you could also see as a metal fuel. You grind it into a powder. You can do it also with iron and aluminium. We burn it, which means make it react with oxygen. And in this case, we don't get CO2, which you would get with burning coal plus oxygen gives you CO2. Now here you have your metal fuel, your iron, you burn it. Basically, it means that you make it rust, you turn into an iron oxide. And this is a very exothermic reaction. So there's a lot of energy that comes from this reaction, which you can then use to do our transportation, power generation in the industry, whatever you want to do with it. And of course, the challenge is once we have our rust or metal oxide, we need to turn it back into a metal. And that we can do with hydrogen, for example, which is then made from renewable electricity. So using renewable electricity, we make hydrogen, which we make react with our iron oxide, and we turn it back to our iron powder, which we can then use again. So basically, it's about storing this renewable energy into a metal, if you wish. And this is very energy dense. You can see here on this graph, I will not go into detail, but it's actually energy denser than coal and then your gasoline, for example, than diesel. So it's a very energy efficient, energy dense way to move or to transport energy around. And of course, this again is this idea that we could do this where energy is cheap and abundant. We use that energy to produce our hydrogen, to take our metal oxide, take it into the metal, transport this from, I don't know, let's say Chile or Japan back to France or Belgium, use it here in our industry, take the rust back to places where it's abundant, where we can make it react with cheap and renewable hydrogen. And so this is like a very efficient way of, in this case, basically what you're doing is transporting renewable energy from this area into this area where you need it. Of course, challenges exist there. The TRL level, which is a level for maturity, is today only between 3 and 5. There are questions related to particle emissions. So these are very, very fine metal powders. You would need to make sure that you don't emit them because these can be toxic for the environment, of course. And then things like what will happen to the size of the particles is very crucial as well. If they are too fine, they will no longer react, and you'll probably lose them with your flue gas. If they become too big, they will no longer react because their reactivity goes down with their size. So there are challenges left, but people are looking at it. So a lot of people like oxidation, for example, Shell and the two Eindhoven are really big on it. Of course, you've got the metal powder producers who can see a future business in it, but also the reduction step where you need this renewable electricity is large companies are looking into this as well. Well, this is one of the 6 that I only wanted to share with you. Just very short again on part 2. So this is the part where, as I said before, what happened to the technology that we reported on in previous editions? Just one example on energy use, and again we did it pretty quantitatively. So we just did it quantitatively with a green arrow going up. This meant that this is really increased strong R&D activity. This is probably more or less as we predicted, as we expected, when we took it up into the previous editions of our document. This one is still moving very, very fast as well. This one is going along, but pretty slower as what we anticipated when we took it up into, let's say, the 2017 report. And this is where really we're pretty wrong, actually. This is not breaking through whatsoever, and the R&D activity is increasing. And for energy, for example, an interesting one which we published, I think in 2018 for the first time, and what happened to it in 2021? Well, this idea of direct air capture for CO2 removal is really gaining traction. And so this is the idea of taking CO2 out of the ground and do something with it. You can either use it again in combination with hydrogen to produce your e-methane, your e-methanol, your e-gas, or you can also store it away. And this is the first large demonstration of it. That you can see these are these direct air captures. So basically you suck a lot of air through them and you take the CO2 out of the air in these kind of ventilators, and then the CO2 in this case is stored away in a geological basalt formation where the CO2 reacts with the basalt and turns it into a carbonate. And so you take CO2 out of the air and basically store it away. So this is today way too expensive. We're talking here about 300 to 400 euros per ton of CO2. But of course, a lot of people are working on this. We expect these technologies to improve significantly. And in 2030, as soon as 2030, probably the cost will go below 100 euros per ton of CO2 to take CO2 out of the air, and then either store it away, as is done here in Iceland, or use it to turn it into an e-molecule. And this is this idea of ambient CO2 to fuse using hydrogen. A lot of projects going on in Europe, but also in the US. So this is clearly something that is booming. In contrast, for example, back in 2019, I think we had a dedicated technology on electricity storage inside wind turbines. And you can see, apart from the test that GE had been doing in Germany, this is not something that we've seen breaking through. Same with electricity storage in the sea. It still remains interesting. It's just too expensive today, which is why it's going on, but slowly, and probably slower than what we anticipated when we published it. One on enabling technologies, because I want a little bit, I've talked a lot about CO2 and everybody is obsessed with CO2 and rightly obsessed with CO2, don't misunderstand me. But if we want to succeed in the energy transition, we will need a lot of materials. And in this case, here it's about sustainable catalysts. But of course, it's not only about catalysts, it's also about the amount of minerals and metals that we will need in our PV, in our wind, in our batteries. And I think we should give more attention to that. So I think we're rightly obsessed with CO2, but probably we should become obsessed a little bit as well with this idea of these critical materials, especially if you look at, for example, the amount of materials that we need. I took this from an IEA publication at the end of last year, where they reported on the amount of these metals that we would need to produce an electrical car versus a conventional car. It's about 6 times. And the same is true for our electricity generation. For wind and for PV, you need a lot more of these minerals, metals, as compared to our coal, natural gas, or nuclear power plants. And then, of course, there's the question, well, will we have enough? And the same report, the IEA predicts that there may be a mismatch. Let's focus on cobalt, for example, which is the crucial one in batteries, that there may be a mismatch between our ambitions which in this case, this is the 2-degree scenario, in fact, the sustainable development scenario, as the IEA likes to call it. And this is the amount of cobalt that the IEA is predicting using existing mines today, and the blue part is that additional mines that will open. So you will see that there is a mismatch between the amount of cobalt that we will need and probably the amount of cobalt that we will get access to. And of course, to close this gap, we will need things to increase things as recycling, but also substitutivity. Can we not substitute cobalt with another metal, another material, which is far more earth abundant than cobalt, and try to do the same thing as we're doing with cobalt today? So substitutivity, recycling, of course, should help to close this gap. It's not only about opening new mines. So the first issue related to this mineral metal issues is having enough. The second one is, of course, I mean, I like this picture because it gives you an idea of the amount of energy that is needed to do this mining of these metals. You can see, I like it because this scoop accidentally picked up a Caterpillar bulldozer. You see the amount of the hugeness of these machines, the amount of energy, and not only energy, electricity, water, and also chemicals. So if it's not only about having enough, I think we also have to think about doing it in a much more sustainable way, and not only talk about CO2, but also make sure that we mine these things in a sustainable way, to not do what we sometimes call this pollution displacement, displacing your pollution to another process. I think we should really make sure that we don't do this in this current energy transition, and take it along as we go. So it's about not having enough, it's about doing it cleaner, and it's also about doing it socially more correct and ethically, because we know there are issues, for example, related to child labor in Congo, for example, for cobalt. So I just wanted to touch upon this because I personally think it's good to be obsessed with CO2, but we should take this issue along as we go along today, and not forget it to avoid this pollution displacement trap. And we've done this a little bit in the past. I tried to depict it in the next few slides. So this is what happened to the energy transition in the past. So here wood was dominant up to almost the late 1880s. Then it was coal dominant, then it was oil dominant, and probably natural gas dominant, especially in the US. We're not very sure yet, given the current crisis in the UA, but probably you would see that gas will overtake oil soon, and of course renewables will overtake the others soon as well. So what we should, you could see that we've switched from different fuels in the past, and actually you could say that coal actually saved our forest, because if you have a look at, this is for the US, what happened with the amount of forests over time. So this is in 1850, when people started using a lot of wood as fuel. You can see that the amount of forests actually by the 1920s has decreased significantly, and that's when people started using coal. And we can say that coal actually, although this has this negative connotation today, you could say that coal saved the forest. Same thing is, you could say that the oil saved the whales, because if you have a look at the whale oil that was used for detergents, for soaps, but also for fuel, actually was peaking around the 1850s, and when then people start discovering oil, and this is why oil, you could say, saved the whales. So we should now make sure that renewables would probably save the CO2 issue, but we will make sure that we don't create another issue which is related to these critical materials, just as coal and oil created the CO2 issue. Last slide on how I think the future is the end. It's not the end, END, so it's the end. So it's not about, I don't like people opposing things, I think we will need a lot of things, and most of the things that everybody's working on, it's not about coal, wind against solar, it's not about nuclear against combined cycle gas turbines, it's about and I think we need to use all these technologies in a smart way, and depending on the location, it will be a combination of all of them. So for example, for the electricity production, it will be and very small scale solar PV plants, it will be and a little bit of combined cycle gas turbines, and nuclear, and offshore wind, and of course also this peer-to-peer trading, vehicle to grid, so it's biogas. So it's basically this and story. Also in the future, in 2050, the customer will be much more fully engaged. So we will have things like peer-to-peer energy trading, like I said before, vehicle to grid, but changing electrons or even molecules with neighbors. It's about solar thermal. So the customer will really be much more involved than we are today. And so this is why, against multiple stages of storage, it's not about large-scale batteries against small-scale batteries. It will be and underground gas and pumped hydro storage. We will need all these solutions, I think, if we want to succeed in the energy transition. And this is my last slide. If you want to download this document, feel free to download it here if you want to know more about the other 5, which I unfortunately do not have time to dig into. So I will stop here if that's okay, and stop sharing my screen and take some ideas or some comments.
Jan, thank you very much. As I said at the beginning, I'm a sort of a techno optimist, and you haven't done anything to reduce my optimism. Of course, the list of problems and challenges can seem endless, but it's very exciting, clearly, to hear about everything that you and your team are working on, and everything that sort of lies ahead of us. But clearly, you know, we're not out of the woods, if that's the appropriate way of putting it. If I could use the sort of the privilege of being your host to ask the first question, if you don't mind, but we have a lot of questions, as you can perhaps see on the chat, and I'll quickly choose a few of them. Hopefully we'll have time for all of them, but just a very, very quick one to kick off. As some of you may know, Jan's office is in Brussels, and we know that a lot of European money is sloshing around and being committed to exciting future projects. We've all heard about the billions for hydrogen. Jan, if you could walk across the road to the Commission and suggest where all those European billions should be focused and spent, would you have any alternative advice for our friends at the Commission as to where they should be investing the research money to complement, of course, the ENGIE money?
Yeah, of course. We talk to them a lot, of course. Yeah, and I think I actually think they're not doing that bad of a job, to be honest. I really think these 3 pathways. If you look at the publication on the Green Deal, clearly also in there, they've identified this. So there are calls for this energy efficiency, which remains important, although we think we've been doing this for decades. There are still technologies to be developed there. On the electrification part, certainly as well, a lot of calls are on that one as well. And also on the green molecules, we've seen recently that a lot of effort is also being, a lot of money, probably a lot more than in the first 2 pathways, is going into this 3rd pathway, just because we need so much, we got less mature technologies to help decarbonize, especially our heavy industry. What I see less and less is, I think, things like putting in a lot of research on things which you could probably do easier with electricity, like cars, for example. I don't think there's still a lot of money going in there, because I think the Commission is also following this 3 pathway approach, and so yeah, well, so things in hydrogen are probably very high, but not only hydrogen. I pointed to the challenge of hydrogen and make it very difficult to store and transport. So we'll need all these other molecules as well. And so the Commission, I think, has pretty good understood it. What the only critic you could say is that, especially in the Innovation Fund, the projects which got funded in the last round were all related much more to carbon capture and storage, because it's about this saving amount. The largest saving in CO2 emissions is, of course, if you take it and you store it away. And that, of course, we regret a little bit, because CCS is not very high on our strategic agenda. But I think in the next Innovation Fund round, also CCU, where you make fuels from CO2 and not only just store it away, will be a lot higher on their agenda. So that would be the only advice I would give them. But I think they're doing a pretty good job.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, lots of questions in the chat. If you don't mind me sort of choosing which ones to go through first, then if I could ask the person who asked the question, perhaps to just very quickly reiterate it verbally, that would be nice. Question from Lima. about these PV modules that directly produce hydrogen. I think we're all rather curious to hear that. Laima, do you want to add anything to me repeating your question very quickly, at least so we can
no, you did
hear
it
from you?
pretty well. Everything's good. So I was just curious about this because it's the first time that I see something like that. So maybe can you tell us a little bit more who's doing that and where to take more info?
Yeah. So who's doing it? We're not the only one, eh? University of Leuven, for example, in Belgium, was probably the first one who published on it in the press. So the idea is that you no longer go from your traditional PV panel where you produce electrons, and then maybe in a second step you use this electricity to run an electrolyzer to produce your hydrogen. In here, what we have is we've got these photoelectrochemical anodes, in fact. So they can harvest light, photons, and turn it immediately to do the water splitting into hydrogen. So for example, the modules that we are developing are, in our case, we still need to give them water, and they would use sunlight and produce it immediately into hydrogen. In other cases, for example, where the KU Leuven is working on, they're even capturing the water from the air, so they can be completely standalone modules, which will actually give you hydrogen when the sun is shining, because they would turn these photons to do the water splitting. The challenges, apart from technically, this is not mature yet. This is out there in labs. We're testing this. The challenge is also of finding a suitable business model. So this is about producing hydrogen in a decentralized way. So to avoid having to transport or store hydrogen, as I said before, this could be a great solution to avoid this transport step of hydrogen and produce it in a much more local way, which is why we are putting our efforts on it. I hope that's
okay.
True.
Perfect. Hendrik had a question about ammonia. Hendrik?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Just briefly, you talked about hydrogen as an important fuel, the difficulty of storing it and using it. Is ammonia an appropriate way of transporting hydrogen? You can absorb hydrogen in ammonia. Is it a good way to store hydrogen, to use it directly, to transport it? Do you have do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it is one to consider. I think it will be part of the solution. As I said, it will not be one molecule. We will need and methanol and methane and ammonia as well. Ammonia, two questions that we're still struggling with is the first one. Once you have ammonia, will you turn it back into hydrogen? Let's say you produce your ammonia in Australia and you arrive in France or in Belgium or in Europe. Will you really turn it back into hydrogen to use it as a fuel? Or will you try to use your ammonia directly? Or will you use it as a fertilizer? Because there's a large market of ammonia that is today for the fertilizer. So having green or e-fertilizers makes a lot of sense as well. So this is the question that we will have, that we're still struggling with. Will we use ammonia as ammonia? Will we try to crack it into hydrogen and use it as a fuel? Or will we use it in the fertilizer? I think certainly in the near future, the fertilizer market makes most sense. But on a longer term, possibly also the two others are possibilities. The only problem with ammonia, but all molecules have their challenges, is that it is pretty toxic. So we have to make sure that we do it in a safe way.
Okay, question about funding. I mean, we've talked briefly about Brussels money, and obviously ENGIE itself is funding a lot of this innovation. Jean-Christophe, you had a question about funding innovation in renewables.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, you know, I'm working for a startup in the floating offshore wind area, and yes, of course, Europe is offering a lot of money, but you know, they are only matching the equity side, and the financial markets today have a very low risk appetite to fund, you know, renewable energy projects due to their capital intensity, their long cycles. So does anyone, maybe you, Jan, or maybe somebody else in the call, have some secret recipes to maybe address that? Thank you.
Yeah.
But if it's a secret, maybe it should stay secret.
A good recipe.
No, yeah, I think it is a challenge. I think it is a problem. I think we experience the same thing. Even within ENGIE, I mean, the business units do have their financial targets, and we see if we come as the research nerds with these new technologies, it is not always easy to convince them to put money in it, to say it politely. So no, I don't think I have a secret recipe. Maybe I don't know, the sense of urgency or something will of climate change will maybe change this. What I can say, for example, is within ENGIE, it's no longer about if we have a project, it's not only about the financial model or the business model. We also have CO2 credits. So for if you have a project, it's we look at, of course, I don't look at it because that would mean we would lose a lot of money, but we got good people looking at the economical side. But we also have people taking care of, look, now we've got this pathway to our carbon neutrality. Does it fit within this carbon? And this is something that is pretty new. And I mean, projects are just not built because we would exceed our CO2 emissions, which is very, very new. And I would hope this would probably can change or can speed things up. That would be.
That's a good point indeed. Yes, thank you.
Okay, we heard a lot about electrons and molecules. It seems pretty clear in your arguments, Jan, were very convincing about it's going to be a while before we're flying across the Atlantic in a battery-powered plane. Question from Benoit about, okay, sounds neat, but you know, what about the power required? Benoit? Are you with us, Benoit?
Yeah. I mean that. Yeah. It's very very easy to understand. Yes, this e-molecules production starting with hydrogen. The question is how much power is going to be needed to operate this, and is this realistic in terms of power production, and what would be the means of productions in that case?
That is a very valid point there, Benoit. It's what I tried to show also with the picture of Belgium carbon neutrality, that we would have to increase the power production by a factor 3, and on top of it, it has to be renewable. It's not just about having 3 times more, but it has to be all renewable. So that is for me a major challenge, as Light pointed out. Having said that, as I said, going from these electrons to the first molecule, which is your hydrogen, this is really the penalizing step, because there you lose 40% of your energy. In the second step, where you take your hydrogen and you make it react with your CO2, there the efficiency is between 85 and 90%. So you don't lose a lot of energy anymore to then turn your hydrogen into another molecule, which is the good news. So you first have to have a good reason to go to a molecule, and the obvious one is hydrogen, but then going to others as ammonia or methane or methanol, you don't lose that much energy anymore. And the energy that you lose there, it's heat, which you can then probably use to do your CO2 capture with. So if you think about integrating things, it can even become more efficient. But no doubt we will need huge amounts of renewable, or in France, people are thinking about low carbon energy, which is nuclear energy, but we would need huge amounts of low carbon energy, let's call them like that, to meet our ambitions on these e-molecules. But the same is true for hydrogen, because I hear it a lot as a critic for these e-fuels, but actually the e-fuels or ammonia or hydrogen is not much different, because you've already lost most of it in your hydrogen production and you hardly lose anything afterwards.
Raphael had a question about vehicle to grid. Are you with us, Raphael?
Yes, and basically just doing some simple math, the number of Tesla cars by the size of the battery, by the amount of time it stands idle, with the cable on, and the willingness people to potentially make money by actually putting back the electrons at the high peak. I think that Elon Musk has the equivalent of 3 nuclear power plants today with the installed base, and adds 1 power plant, the equivalent 1 power plant of peak power every year. So why is it that we don't have yet a bidirectional cable system and carted grid? What's blocking?
Yeah, I'd have to talk to our expert. I've got the same question. I just got a new electric car and I can't do vehicle to home or vehicle to grid. I'm not very, it's about, I think it's a regulatory issue mainly, as far as I understood it. But I agree, we should really speed up here. For the moment, I think there's the Nissan and the Kia who can do it, or the Hyundai, and all the others have actually not integrated, like Audi or Volkswagen today. If you buy an Audi or Volkswagen or a Tesla, by the way, they don't allow you this bi-directional charge. Although technically it's not that difficult. You need is just a converter in your car, but it's not that much expensive. It's not that difficult. Honestly, I think there is some reluctance from the car manufacturers for reasons which I think are no longer valid. And I would hope, and what I see is that this will change very fast in the future. But I agree, we should speed this up.
I think there was an interesting pilot project run by Renault with the Zoes in one of the Canary Islands. But of course, that's a very sort of nice, neat, small, little scale, 300 car type setup, which clearly isn't going to, clearly is a marginal, sort of at the marginal pilot level.
Yeah, we've also got a pilot running on it in Francorchamps in Belgium, in fact. But as you say, it's about with all the same cars. It's all about, it's a well-controlled environment, and it's not on the market yet. It's a pilot test.
If I may say and add to this, I'm a bit pessimistic, because if such an obvious low-hanging fruit is not actually going forward, and I don't know who is testing it, then I'm worried about all these new, very techno-heavy solutions that are ahead of us, if this easy one is not even progressing.
Yeah, I agree. This regulatory affair, regulatory stuff is the same as for hydrogen and for e-fuels. In many cases, it's not the technology that is not progressing, but it's the regulatory that is not ready yet. And there we expect a lot from government, from EU to speed up as well.
Kenneth actually had the first question. It was one of your early slides with that set of very small but very interesting images of all the various different pilot projects around the world. Kenneth, you had a question about just pilot projects done by ENGIE versus others.
Yeah, it's really out of curiosity, because OEMs, for example, for offshore wind, such as Vestas, SGRE, would have the same sort of testing. So I was just wondering, how does ENGIE do these pilots, and what differentiates ENGIE from how the OEMs do it? Is it from a TRL level point of view, from lab to scaling up? Yeah, just curious what differentiates ENGIE from how other companies who are directly involved in these different technologies, or those who specialize in it, do the pilots.
Well, for example, the floating wind turbine ones or the other wind turbine, as I said, we're not the technology developers. We usually do these projects together with them. We hardly do any projects on our own. The only one which you could, and even the hydrogen co-combustion and the gas turbine, it was done together with the OEM. We do it together. This was also new for them, but we do it together to make sure that we both learn. Of course, the idea is that we get a competitive advantage for our business units, but since we're not the technology developers, in almost all of the projects, except for the green gas ones, where I said before, where we do things on our own, we usually work together with these people. We work together with the OEMs, with the technology developers, and the hope is that we understand it a little bit better and faster than our competitors, and integrate it in a smarter way. That's the business of all of the tasks that we see ourselves as ENGIE Research.
Yeah, so I guess it's the integration piece that's probably not necessarily present in the OEMs for these different specialist technologies. Thank you, Jan.
Yeah.
Okay, if I could perhaps jump in again with another quick question. Jan, you obviously touched on fusion power and the fact that private money is starting to be invested in it. What's your sort of personal view on fusion?
Yeah, it used to be like a joke that everybody was saying it will come in 50 years, and everybody keeps on saying it will come in 50 years. We did talk to a few, well, actually the MIT startup is an interesting one, for example, where they reached for the first time this 20 Tesla. So it seems that the technology bricks separately are pretty ready. The question is, again, this integration. So it's about having this magnetic field very close to a temperature of 150 million degrees, where you need 20 centimeters further, like minus 250 degrees. These things have not been tested, they've not been integrated. So we're not there yet, although they're optimistic. They're claiming they will have a first pilot running by 2035 is, I think, what they mentioned. We know that this is probably far too fast. So I think the joke is no longer valid that it will be in another 50 years. Probably by 2050 would be my guess, that these things, that's the first nuclear fusion plants will actually reach the market. Of course, there are uncertainties about what the price will be, and that will be, of course, very much dominating whether it will ever break through large scale, yes or no. But technologically, I would think by 2050 we could have something ready.
I mean, I read something that somebody said, well, you know, by then it'll be too late.
That's true.
But then arguably it'll never be too late.
Yeah. So it will be too late. I don't think we should wait for it to not do anything, and we should head full on with the renewables, of course. But if we have it ever ready by then, I mean, having a large scale, low carbon or no carbon, safe and no waste plant will remain useful to, like, a kind of a base load.
Yeah. Hendrik had another question about energy storage, and not just storing energy as electricity in some form. Hendrik?
Yeah, thanks. This is something that sort of bugs me lately. I'm in the business of generating electricity and you know, looking at creating new fuels. We talk about greater efficiency in the use, but after all, a lot of energy is just used for heating homes and heating in industry, and we're talking about electrifying that too. But it seems to me there might be a missing step. Storing electricity is difficult. Storing heat is less difficult. Should we be putting more effort into storing heat, you know, underground or in salt or something, as a way of evening out the demand for energy, and you know, as a way of reducing all the need for investment in all of these fancy technologies we're talking about?
And to complement Hendrik's question, I mean, someone actually once said to me that my electric water heater that heats the water between 11 at night and 7 o'clock in the morning with off-peak electricity is actually one of, you know, the major parts of that heat storage stroke energy storage strategy, at least in France, with electric water heaters is potentially a piece of that puzzle.
I would fully agree with Henrik, and we are working on it, and we are looking at phase-changing materials, but also storing it. I think storing it underground, I agree, is probably underexploited. To do seasonal storage of heat underground, where you try to store heat from summer and get it back in winter. We've got a few projects on it, but probably I agree it's something that makes a lot of sense. It's possibly cheaper, and we should increase our efforts on it. I agree. It's a very, very good, easy way to store energy, especially over longer term.
Another question from Lima about just innovations in transmission and distribution lines. Lima?
Yes, indeed. I mean, we have seen every innovation is always concentrated, I think, in distributed generation and so on. But what about transmission lines and distribution lines? Because we hear, I mean, I'm from Colombia. I'm right now in Colombia, and what we have here are the smart valves that we're implementing in our transmission lines in order to pump more energy, so to say. But which other innovations do you see, or do you know, or will come? I don't know.
I'm not an expert in energy transmission. The thing that I know we work on is this HVDC, so high voltage direct current lines are very useful to transport electrons over longer distances. Of course, the challenge is this will have to be new installations, and people are very, very reluctant to have new transmission grids. I would have to bring you in contact with the experts on our transmission and distribution to really, but I don't see anything like major breakthrough to be that we've seen there. In our report back in 2015, I think we had everything DC at home. So the idea was that the homes no longer have an AC grid as we have today, but everything is DC, because today we have all these converters for our laptops, for our phones, while our panels are already producing DC power. Our cars are taking DC powers, and so our LEDs can take DC power. So why still have AC? And we thought that this would really break through and every house would be DC powered by 2025. There again, related to the previous comment of why is this bifacial vehicle to grid not coming? It's a lot about regulation, I think. And today, I don't see a lot of houses that have this DC, although we had in mind that it would technically make a lot of sense. So I have not seen any big innovations in transmission or distribution, but I would need to.
It's quite difficult to achieve one, yes.
I would need to.
Thanks a lot, Jan.
Thank you.
Okay, last question. Amandine had a question about extra power consumption from hydrogen. Not sure if I can understand the question. Amandine, could you
hello
ask
everyone.
your question again?
So it's kind of similar to the question Benoit asked earlier. So the question is, if you look at the electro-intensive industries in general, and especially for when we talk about hydrogen, for example, for transforming electrical energy into a molecule, the problem is if you bring new loads to the electrical grids, and this new load will require extra power from fossil fuel power plants, then you kind of lose the point of producing clean hydrogen, for example. And so I can see the need and the vision in 2050, but I have the hard time figuring out how to reconcile the short-term adequacy of the energy resources we have with the challenges we face with decarbonization.
Yeah, fully agree. I fully agree, and I think yesterday, was it not that also Frans Timmermans brought up this issue and said that for projects also in the Green Deal and subsidized by Europe, you cannot do this. And what you just say, you cannot use or do an existing PPA. If you build a hydrogen plant, you would need to build at the same time a new renewable electricity. So it's not about taking it from the grid, even if you have a green PPA, because it does mean that you shift your merit order, and other fossil generation of electricity will have to start up to compensate because you're taking away the green electricity. So it will have to be new capacity if you want to have subsidies from the EU. So it's a very important point. It's also why I think it's important to test these technologies here in Europe, where we don't have renewable electricity yet. It's to understand them here, test them here, but keep it pretty small. Probably the big rollout of this will maybe not be in Europe, or at least not in Belgium, Germany, Holland, where we will not have renewable electricity sufficient to do this kind of molecules. We will need all that we have to already electrify what is electrifiable. So which is why we think importing these molecules will make a lot of sense. But it's a very good comment.
So my second question was, do you think then, I mean, I guess we have to go for both routes, but shall we focus on increasing the clean power production where we need it, or shall we focus on increasing or reducing the cost of transporting molecules from where they're easy to produce?
I think we will need both. We will need all the green electricity that we can produce here to use it as electricity in our industry and at home. But it will have to be complemented just as we do today. We import a lot of oil and gas. we will need to continue to import renewable molecules. In that case, I think we will need both of them. I don't think we can have one-to-one, unless, of course, which is like France is betting on. You build a huge amount of nuclear, then probably you could also start thinking about producing low carbon hydrogen, in this case, on a massive scale.
Thank you.
Okay, Jan, thank you very much. That was very stimulating and interesting, and very much lived up to everyone's high expectations. So a very warm thanks on everyone's behalf. I've just put on the chat to complement your earlier slide, the French URL for your report. I'm not sure whether that downloads a French version or comes to the same thing. But in any case, that report, if I understand it, is certainly public, and I'm sure will be read with great interest by everyone. So Jan, thank you very much. Any last thoughts that you'd like to share with the INSEAD community?
I'd like to thank
what can we do to help?
No, very. Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me here. This is always stimulating too. And I thought the question and answers were really a lot of experts in the room. So it's good. Yeah. I didn't know that.
I'll email you actually just the record of the chat questions,
right,
so that you've got that in writing before we close. And Magali, give me 2 minutes before closing just to copy the chat, please.
Yeah, if you just, it's not a French version. You can click on English, and then it will give you the English version if you wish.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. All right.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan.
Have
a good day and a good weekend.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, guys. Have a lovely day.
Tu me dis, Alastair, si tu veux.
Ouais, donne-moi juste 2 secondes. Ouais, parce que évidemment, si on ferme, on perd le chat.
Je l'ai, Alastair, je l'ai copié là.
Ok, c'est bon.
Je l'ai copié déjà.
C'est bon. J'ai tout. Ok.
Allez, bonne
Merci
journée.
Magali.
Merci beaucoup, Alastair. Super, super animation.
Ouais, bah,